Hello and welcome to Spread Book Joy. This is a quick wrap up of some of the books that I've been reading recently in middle grade. If you're new to this channel, I'm Jack, a qualified teacher looking to spread the joy of books and reading as far and wide as possible. I read a lot of children's books and I just thought I'd share my thoughts on them, and this is my quick wrap up of what I've been reading recently. This first book is High Rise Mystery by Sharna Jackson. It was a Waterstones Children's Book of the Year 2020. It won the middle grade category and I really enjoyed it. I loved the characters Nick and Norva. So the premise is Nick and Norva are 11 and 13-year-old sisters who live in a high-rise block, which is an estate known as the Try, because there are 3 blocks on each. They're called the corners, corner 1, corner 2, corner 3, and they want to be detectives for a long time, and they've been solving sort of little crimes around the estate, nothing pressing, nothing serious, but then they discover a body, and they discover the body of a person that we don't meet at the start. We only discover him after he's died, but he's someone that they really like and really love, and they want to discover who's done it. So Nick is the more logical of the pair, and she's the one narrating the story. She's the younger, and Norva is slightly older and 13. And this book is, I think, it's for sort of 8 to 12-year-olds, but I would suggest 11, 12 up. The reason I say that is Norva has a crush on a slightly older boy, and some of the things she says, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable reading with sort of children in primary school necessarily. So for example, at one point she says something like, yeah, cops will be crawling over the scene like me on Mark in my dreams. I think that's just a little bit too strong for me for middle grade. Some people might be okay with it, and also there is the word, there's a few words in there that I think are a little bit more teen YA for me in feel, but the story itself isn't. What's really excellent about it is I've taught in London for a long time. I am from London. I've taught in London, as you can hear from my accent, but I've taught in London for a long time, and I really recognise a lot of the children in terms of the way they speak, the way that our children speak in some of our schools, and it's really nice to see some representation of that actually, because it's a real, I think it's supposed to be South London, I'm not sure, but I think people who aren't familiar with that sort of accent and the way of talking might struggle a little bit with it, but if you are, then it hits the nail right on the head. And I think I think it'd be really popular with some of the children that I've taught actually, and the way that they just sort of speak is really representative of some of the children that I've taught. So yeah, there we go. Look, you make when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. Now obviously ass is in this case I'm referring to like a silly person, a donkey, but it's a sort of, it is a swear word as well, so you just need to be a bit careful when reading this. But other than that, in terms of the story, it's a fast pace, it's a well plotted mystery. I think I like the devices used throughout, where they've sort of gathering their clues, and every now and again they're crossing off what they found. So you'll get, let me see if I can find one. So they've got all their information, they write it down, they cross off things that they found out about, and then they've got their sort of their suspects and their alibis, and whether it's corroborated and what their motivation is and things like that. And I just really like the way it was done. I just like the characters as well. I think they're really likeable, they're very funny. It was done with quite a bit of humour, and yeah, I really liked it. But like I said, just be wary. You need to be aware that those things are in there, because they are. The next book is The 1,000-Year-Old Boy by Ross Welford. This is a great book. I loved it. I loved reading it. I think it was really enjoyable. It's about a boy called Alfie Monk who is 1,000 years old. He was actually born 1,000 years ago, and he was a Viking in this country, and his mum and him have been alive for that long. And you'll find out why when you read the story. But it's just it's a fun read. It's a quick read. It's one of those books where you've got short chapters you whiz through because you want to read the next chapter. And it's not just narrated by Alfie, but it's narrated by another boy called Aidan as well. So it switches between, the narration switches from one character to another. And when it's Alfie that's narrating, you have a different font from when it is Aidan that's narrating. So this is Alfie's kind of font, and then you switch to Aidan and his font's slightly different, so you can easily tell who's talking. It's not too hard to mix them up. But so Alfie, we find out at the start how Alfie becomes immortal in a sense, and then we also find out we switch straight to present day, and the boy Aidan has just moved into a new area, and he's out exploring, and he meets his new neighbour, a girl called Roxy, and she says, do you want to see something cool? And she takes him into the forest, and in the forest there's a stone house, and she says a witch lives there, but it's Alfie and his mum. And then they all end up meeting, and there's a big disaster, and Alfie's mum dies in a fire, and Alfie comes to live with, they try to hide Alfie at first because he doesn't want to get picked up by the authorities because they've been living off grid, and then unfortunately he does get picked up and he goes to school with them, and it's like all he's wanted is to grow up because he's not been able to grow up and go through puberty or any of those things. It doesn't mention that, but he's just not made any friends either. It talks about in the past when he tried to make friends, the disastrous things that happened when they got older and he didn't. It's a lovely, lovely book, really good read. I think any children will enjoy it. It'll be a great class read. It's quite long though, but like I said, the chapters are quite quick, and it's quite quick to get through. I really loved it. I'm definitely going to read more by Ross Welford. I've got, I think, the Time Travelling with My Hamster is one of his other books. Really good. This was a short read, but a fantastic one. Tamarind and the Star of Ishta by Jasbinder Bilan. If you've not read any of Jasbinder Bilan's work, I've got a video on Asher and the Spirit Bird, which was her debut, which won the Costa Coffee Children's Book Award, and this one is her latest book. It came out about a month ago, and all her covers are just designed by this illustrator called H, who's a Romanian illustrator, and both of them so far have been really beautiful. Tamarind and the Star of Ishtar is again, Jasbinder Bilan writes like very magical realism books, so set in the real world with elements of the mystical and magical about them. And this book, we meet Tamarind, who is on her way to India to meet her mother's family. Her mother died when she was young. Her dad has remarried. She's been raised in England with her father, and her dad has remarried, and they're going over to India. Her dad's going on honeymoon, and she's going to stay with her mother's family, who she's never met, and find out a bit more about her mother. And it's beautifully written. This is the thing about her writing. She's so poetic in the way she writes, and she, especially Asher and the Spirit Bird was also set in India and around the Himalaya, and I think her family are from the Punjab and the Himalayan foothills, and she knows the area really well, and she really evokes it beautifully. And Tamarind, no one will tell her much about her mum, and so she discovers family secrets and something mystical at the family mansion, so she goes to stay at this old family house, and it's just a brilliantly written book, and it's not very long. It's a nice one for story time, but it's also, I think, a really great book for studying. You could do sort of, if you were a teacher, you could do it for you could use it for English writing and guided reading. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. Highly recommend that one. Really well written. The next one, I adored this book. These are all very different, actually. I've just realised. This is Cosmo by Carlie Sorosiak. This is Cosmo, and Cosmo's desperately trying to keep his family together. He's a gorgeous golden retriever. He's narrating the story, and you can tell the person who wrote this has and loves dogs. She writes him so well, and my heart was just full every time I was reading. He's about 14. So he narrates how the mum and dad bought him when he was a puppy, and it was just the mum and dad. Then they had a little boy who came along, the son, who I forget, Max, that's his name, the son Max, who came along, and they said to him, Cosmo, you're going to be a big brother now and you have to look after him. So he's always looking after Max. And we meet them. Max is, I think, 11, and Emmeline is 6 or 7, the little sister, maybe even younger. And Cosmo, he feels it's his responsibility to look after the family, and he's a member of the family, and he wants to keep them, and he knows they're not very happy, and the parents are arguing. So it's actually it was a really good book for children who are going through that as well, because the parents do go through a divorce in the end. Cosmo and the boy Max are trying to keep the family together, And I think in a lot of situations, in a lot of stories where that sort of thing happens, they do end up staying together, but in this they don't. It's realistic. Families get divorced, things happen, and at the very end of it all, they're still a family. They still come to family events together. They still, it's not the disaster and it's not the end of the world that the children think it is. So that was quite a good message. And I just love this character, Cosmo. He's loyal and he's got a beautiful soul and he's lovely. Just everything. If your dog could talk, this is what he would say. So highly recommend this. I loved it. I'm definitely going to look at some of her other books. Carlie Sorosiak, she was very good. Next book, this is a completely different type of book again. I think I've gone for really different ones this time. This is A Kind of Spark by Elle McNicoll, and it's about a girl called, I've forgotten her name, Addie. Oh God, how do I forget Addie? I think it's because I've read so much recently, I keep mixing up the characters. But this is about a girl called Addie who is autistic, and she lives in a village in Scotland, and it's a real insight. She narrates her story, and she's at school and they're learning about witch trials, and there were lots of witch trials in Scotland, and women that were persecuted and then they were tortured and hung and executed basically for being witches, and they weren't real witches, of course, they were just different and slightly odd, and she really identifies with that, and she gets really upset that no one's remembered these women. So she sets out to raise awareness, and she wants their village, which had some of the worst witch trials, she wants their village to have a memorial to these witches. So she's trying her best to get that recognised, and the book's wonderful. It's really brilliantly written. Elle McNicoll is herself autistic, and she's written, I think this is the best representation I've read of an autistic child, and trying to explain how the world appears to them and how things are for them. And I think it's anyone who is interested, who works with children particularly, should read this and try and it gives you a real insight into how it is to live in a world that's not made for you. It's made for the neurotypical people, and I just loved it. I thought it was just brilliantly written. Even aside from that angle, it's a brilliantly written story with great characters, and you'll just really enjoy it. And again, not a long read and a very quick one, because I whizzed through it because I absolutely adored it. I really love this book. I think she's a great writer, and I can't wait for more from her. Right, I'm just editing and I've realised I've forgotten this book, and I can't believe I've forgotten it. The One and Only Ivan, another book I read this month. It's a Newbery Medal winner. It was really big in the States, and I kept seeing videos for it on YouTube all over the place from American teachers and American, basically it's very big in America. And then it came out on the Disney Channel, and I'd had it on my TBR for a long time, and I did something I never do. I watched the film before I read the book, and I loved the film, and I cried. And the film's on Disney Plus, and it's got Bryan Cranston, Sam Rockwell, Helen Mirren, and the best person is Danny DeVito, who plays Bob, who's a friend. So the story is about Ivan. It's based on a true story. Ivan's a real gorilla. Ivan was kept at a mall circus in America for nearly 30 years, and he was freed, and he now lives in, I want to say, Atlanta Zoo. So Katherine Applegate has written this story about him, and in the story Ivan narrates his own story. He's living at the mall, and he's got his owner, who is called Mac, who runs the circus, and they do so many shows a day, and they have people visiting them. And there's not just Ivan, but there's an elephant called Stella, and a dog who isn't supposed to be there. He's a stray, and he's been hiding in he's like Ivan's best friend, and he's called Bob, who Danny DeVito plays in the film brilliantly. It's fantastic. And then this tiny baby elephant, because the circus isn't doing so well, Mac buys this tiny baby elephant called Ruby, and Stella isn't doing so well. She's quite old, and Stella dies, and she tells Ivan doesn't think he's in prison. He thinks he's in I can't remember what he calls it, his domain is, he doesn't call it a cage, but he is in a cage, and he doesn't realise it, and he's kind of blocking out all the memories of his life before he came to the US and before he was in captivity. And Stella says, I don't want Ruby to grow up, and so he makes a promise to free Ruby, and in the process himself So it's a wonderful, wonderful book. The book's very different from the film. If you have watched the film, in the film, Mac is played by Bryan Cranston, and he comes across as much more sympathetic than in the book. So just be prepared for that. But it's a wonderful book. It's, you know, like it says, courage and friendship ultimately. A lot of things about, you know, thinking about animals, animal rights, captivity, and, you know, he's wonderfully realised by Katherine Applegate. It's a wonderful book, and they're very, very short, brief chapters, and you can read it quite quickly. Whilst it's like sort of, you know, 200 and odd, maybe 300 odd pages, it's actually a really short book because a lot of the chapters are, as you can see, look, they're really short. They're really short things, and lots of space in between the lines. So I read it really quickly. I kind of read it in one sitting, but beautiful book, absolutely gorgeous, and based on a true story. And you could do a load of research around animal captivity and around gorillas who are really endangered. It's a wonderful book. Yeah, another brilliant one, and again, very different from all the others that I've recommended. So yeah, get The One and Only Ivan, you won't regret it. There's a follow-up called The One and Only Bob, which I'm looking forward to getting at some point. That's it for this quick reading wrap up. I think I've forgotten some books, but I feel like I've read a lot lately, and I just wanted to just mention a few that I think, if you're looking for a book for bedtime, for story time, for a present for a child, these are really different books, really different styles, different themes, different characters, but all equally very, very good. So I highly recommend them for you. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye.